Welcome to this comprehensive course on literary theory. I'm Dr. Muhammad Alwishi from the London College of International Studies. Over the next 3 hours, we're going to explore the fascinating world of literary theory, a field that will fundamentally transforms how you read, analyze, and understand literature. This course is designed to give you practical tools and the theoretical framework that you can apply immediately to any text you encounter. Whether you're studying poetry, fiction, or drama, the concepts we will discuss today will deepen your appreciation and sharpen your critical thinking skills. Now, let's move to uh, the course outline. Let's begin by looking at what we will cover in this course. We'll start with an introduction of literary theory itself, understanding what it is and why it matters. Then we will explore the fundamental question, what is literary criticism? From there, we will dive into specific theoretical approaches, formalism, new criticism, which focus on the next or the text itself. Reader response theory, which emphasizes your role as a reader. Philosophical criticism, which explores the unconscious mind in literature. New historism and culture criticism, which situte texts in their historical contexts. Biographical and social criticism, which connects literature to authors' lives and social structures, and archetypal and mythological criticism, which identifies universal patterns across cultures. But this isn't just theoretical knowledge. We'll also focus on applying literary theory with practical reading strategies. We'll work through case studies showing a formalist analysis of a poem and reader response interpretation. You'll learn about writing with literary theory and understand the reader's role in interpretation. By our conclusion, you'll be ready to embrace literary theory as a student and carry these skills through your academic career and beyond. Now let's move to the learning objectives, and they are: what will you be able to do by the end of the course? First, you'll master annotation or outlining, and summarizing strategies that enhance your comprehensive and retention of literary texts across all genres, whether you're reading a poetry, novels, or plays. Second, you'll identify and confidently use key literary terms across all these genres to articulate sophisticated interpretations. You'll speak the language of literary criticism fluently. Third, you'll apply various theoretical frameworks to analyze literary work from multiple percep perspectives and uncover layered meanings. You'll see that texts aren't one-dimensional. They reveal different insights depending on which theoretical lens you use. Fourth, you'll connect the literary elements to broader social psychological and historical context to develop nuanced readings. Literature doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's deeply connected to the world that produces it and the world that reads it. Now let's move to the learning outcomes. These objectives translate into specific measurable outcomes. By the end of this course, you'll demonstrate the ability to break down complex texts into their content components and analyze how these elements interact to create meaning, mood, and impact. This analytical decomposition is the foundation of all literary criticism. You will use literary terminology with accuracy and confidence in both oral discussions and written analysis, employing the language of literary criticism fluently. This vocabulary isn't a jargon for its own sake, it's precision tools for clear communication about literature. You'll apply at least four major literary theories to interpret texts, demonstrating understanding of each theories, unique perspectives, and methodology. You will see how different theories illuminate different aspects of the same work. You'll originally evaluate different interpretations of the same text and develop original, well-supported analytical essays that contribute new insights. You won't just summarize what others have said. You'll add your own voice to the conversation. Finally, you'll reflect thoughtfully on the reader's role in shaping textual meaning and acknowledge the validity of multiple interpretive perspectives. This intellectual humility and openness is essential for sophisticated literary study. Now, let's go to the introduction to literary theory main content. Now, what exactly is literary theory? Literary theory represents one of the most exciting and existing developments in modern literary studies. Mm. Rather than prescribing a single correct way to read literature, theory offers us a rich collection of lenses through which we can view and interpret texts. Each theoretical framework highlights different aspects of a work, revealing meaning and the connections that might or otherwise remain hidden. Think of literary theory as a toolbox. Each tool serves a specific purpose, and skilled readers learn when and how to apply each one. You wouldn't use a hammer when you need a screwdriver. And similarly, you wouldn't use formalism when historical criticism would be more revealing, through sometimes you might need both. The practical value of studying literary theory extends far beyond the classroom. These frameworks enhance our understanding of human experience, culture, and the language itself. They teach us to question assumptions, recognize patterns, and appreciate complexity. When we apply psychological theory to a character's motivations or historical theory to novels, social critic, we're not just analyzing literature, we're developing transferable skills in critical thinking, empathy, and cultural awareness. These skills serve you in any career, any relationship, and any situation requiring careful analysis and nuanced understanding. Now, let's move to the four major theoretical approaches diagram. Let's review four major approaches we will explore in detail. First, formalism focuses on textual elements like structure, language, and form. Um, it asks how does the text work as a crafted object? What do its formal features contribute to meaning? Second, reader response. They emphasizes how individual readers create meaning. It recognizes that reading is active, not passive. You bring your experiences, expectations, and the cultural background to every text you encounter. Third, physical criticism explores unconscious motivations and archetypal patterns. It treats literary as a window into human psyche, revealing desires, fears, and conflicts that may not be fully conscious. Fourth, new historicism examines texts within historical and cultural contexts. It insisted that literature both reflects and shapes the society and produces it. Text and context are inseparable. There aren't the only theories we'll study, but they represent fundamentally different ways of approaching literature, and understanding them gives you a solid foundation in literary criticism. Now, let's move to the closing statement for introduction. This course will guide you through these major critical approaches and more. You'll learn not just that or what each theory claims, but how to apply it practically to texts you're reading. By the end, you'll have developed your own critical voice that inquire combination of theoretical knowledge, analytical skill, and personal perspective that distinguishes your interpretations. Remember this crucial point: there is no single right interpretation of a text, but there are more and less persuasive readings supported by careful attention to evidence and theoretical consistency. Your goal isn't to find the one correct meaning, but to develop interpretations that are insightful, well supported, and theoretically informed. Literature is rich enough to sustain multiple valid interpretations. That's a part of what makes it endure across time and the cultures. Now let's move to what is literary criticism? Now let's address a fundamental question. What exactly is literary criticism? Literary criticism is the interpretation, analysis, and evaluation of literary works. As its hard, criticism is an act of engaged reading, a conversation between reader and text that seeks to eliminate meaning, uncover patterns, and assess cultural significance. The word criticism often carries negative connotation of fault finding, of harsh judgment, but in literary studies, criticism is fundamentally constructive. It's about building understanding, not tearing down works. A literary critic serves as a guide, helping others to see depths and the dimensions into they might have missed on first reading. Think about watching a complex film with someone who understands the cinematography, symbolism, and narrative structure. They do not run your enjoyment, they enhance it by pointing out things you didn't notice, connection you didn't make. That's what literary critics do. They're not gatekeepers preventing you from enjoying literature. They're guiding, revealing its richness and complexity. Now let's go to traditional versus modern understanding. The practice of literary criticism has evolved significantly over time. Historically, criticism meant judgment, determining whether a work was good or bad according to established standards. Critics evaluated texts against classical models, checking for adherence to Jones conventions and the moral standards. Did this tragedy follow Aristotle's rules? Did this epic maintain proper decorum? Was this novel morally instructive? This evaluative function hasn't disappeared entirely, but it's no longer the primary purpose of academic literary criticism. Today's literary criticism is interpretive and analytical rather than purely judgmental. Critics explore how texts generate meaning, how they reflect and shape culture, and how different reading strategies reveal different insights. The emphasis is on understanding complexity, not rendering simple verdicts of good or bad. Modern cities recognize that evaluation is often subjective and culturally specific. What one era considers great literature, another might dismiss, and vice versa. Instead of asking, it is good, we ask, how does this work? What does it mean? How does it reflect its cultural moment? What can I teach? Or what can it teach us about human experience? Now let's move to historical evolution of criticism. Let's trace your how criticism has evolved through different historical periods. In the classic periods, Criticism focused on rhetorical effectiveness and adherence to established forms. Aristotle's poetic exemplified this approach. He answered authority systematically, identifying its essential elements and functions during the Renaissance and Enlightenment. Critics emphasized moral instruction and decorum, judging works by their educational and ethical value. Literature was supposed to teach virtue and define character. Entertainment was secondary to moral purpose. The Romantic era brought a significant shift toward appreciating originality, emotional, and the author's creative genius and the primary values. Critics celebrated imagination, individual exploration, and the power of emotion over reason. In our modern period, where have seen an explosion of diverse theoretical approaches examining texts from psychological, social, historical, and linguistic perspectives rather than one dominant way of reading. We now have multiple frameworks, each revealing different aspects of literary works. This pluralism is one of the literary criticism's great strengths. It acknowledges literature's complexity and richness. Now let's go to the modern critics' role, the role of the literary critics has evolved significantly alongside these changes. Modern cities do not simply tell readers what to think about a text, they offer frameworks for thinking, models of careful reading, and insights drawn from interdisciplinary knowledge. A critic might explain how a novel's narrative structure reflects its thematic concerns, how the fragmented structure of a modernist novel, for example, mirrors the fragmented consciousness of modern life. They might show how a poem's imagery connects to specific historical events, providing context that deepens our understanding, or they might explore how readers' cultural backgrounds influence their interpretations, making us aware of our own assumptions and biases. This work requires not just love of literature, but knowledge of histories, philosophy, psychology, linguistics, and cultural studies. Literary criticism, properly understood, is one of the humanity's most integrative disciplines, bringing together diverse knowledge to eliminate how texts mean and matter. The best critics are widely read. Not just in literature, but across many fields, and they draw on this broad knowledge to enrich their literary analysis. Now let's go to formalism, new criticism, reader response. Um, let's now turn to our first major theoretical approach, formalism and new criticism. Formalism revolutionized literary studies in the early 20th century by insisting that we focus on the text itself, its language structure, imagery, and the formal devices, rather than external factors like the author's biography or historical content. So this might seem obvious now, but it was actually quite revolutionary. Before formalism, critics often spent more time discussing an author's life or historical background than actually analyzing what the text says and how it says it. The formalist said, wait, let's actually look carefully at the text itself, what's on the page, how is it constructed, how do its formal features create meaning. This approach, refined by the new critics in Americas during the mid 20th century, taught generations of students the art of close reading, the careful, detailed analysis of textual features. The formalist asks, how does this text work as a self-contained aesthetic object? What do its formal features contribute to its overall meaning and effect? This focus on the text itself becomes foundational to modern literary study. Now let's go to The key principles of formalism. Formalism resets on several key principles. First, textual autonomy. The text should be understood on its own terms without requiring external information. You shouldn't need to know the author's biography or the historical context to understand what's happening in the text itself. The meaning is in the words on the page. Second, organic unity. All elements of a well-crafted work contribute to a unified whole. Nothing is accidental or relevant. Even every word, every image, every structural choice serves the overall artistic purpose. The formalists believed that great literature achieves perfect integration of all its parts. Third, close reading. This means careful attention to language, including word choice, syntax, imagery, and sound patterns. You read slowly, attentively, noticing everything, what metaphors appear, how do sentences flow, what sounds repeat. These details aren't decorative, they create meaning. Fourth, paradox and ambiguity. Great literature often contains productive tensions and multiple meanings rather than being flaws. These contradictions and complexities are signs of literary sophistication. A poem that can mean two seemingly opposite things simultaneously is richer than one with a single simple message. Finally, form and content inseparability. What a text says cannot be separated from how it says it. Meaning emerged from the interaction of content and form. You cannot paraphrase a poem without losing something essential because the way it's expressed is part of what is means or what it means. Then let's go to the major figures in formalism. Several critics were instrumental in developing formalist and new critical approaches. Uh, I.A. Richards pioneered practical criticism at Cambridge University, teaching students to analyze poems without knowing their authors. He'd give students texts with no identifying information and ask them to analyze the poetry itself. This exercise trained them to focus on external features rather than relying on repetition or context. John Crowley Ransom coined the term new criticism and emphasized the poem as a special kind of knowledge, no specific or no scientific knowledge or historical knowledge, but aesthetic knowledge that can only be assessed through careful attention to literary form. Clint Brooks explored paradox and irony as essential literary features. His influential book, The Wall, wrote Yorn analyzed the focus or famous poems to show how they achieve meaning through tension, contradiction, and ironic complexity. W. K. Wimsatt warned against what he called the international fallacy, the mistake of conflating the author's intentions with external meaning. Just because an author intended something doesn't mean the text successfully conveys it, and the texts can mean things there. Authors didn't consciously intend. The meaning is in the text, not the author's mind. Now let's move to example formalist analysis. Let's look at a concrete example of formalist analysis. Consider Tim O'Brien short story, The Things They Carried, analyzing this through a formalist lens. Uh, we focus on the repetitive cataloging of physical objects and the tension between literal and metaphorical weight. The story opens with detailed lists. First, Lieutenant Jamie Cross carried letters from a girl named Martha Mitchell Sanders carried condoms. Coeskill carried an illustrated New Testament. These concrete specific details accumulate and feel their weight, not just physical weight, but emotional and psychological weight. The story's structure alternating between concrete lists and abstract reflections creates meaning through form itself, showing how soldiers carry both physical burdens and emotional trauma. The repetition of carried becomes almost hypnotic, accumulating meaning. The form the form. This obsessive listing mirrors and the content which is about burden, responsibility, and the impossibility of escaping what you carry. A formalist wouldn't discuss O'Brien's own experience in Vietnam through he served there on the historical context of the Vietnam War. Instead, they focus on how the text itself, through its formal choices, creates meaning and emotional impact. Now let's move to strengths and limitations of formalism. Like any theoretical approach, formalism has both strengths and the limitations. Its strengths include developing close reading skills. This careful attention to textual details is essential for all literary criticism. It focuses attention on literary craft, teaching us to appreciate how writers achieve their effective. It produces detailed textual analysis, grounding interpretation in specific evidence, and it works particularly well for complex layered texts where multiple forms elements interact to create meaning. However, formalism also has limitations. It ignores the historical context, treating texts as if they exist outside of time. But literature is always produced in specific historical moments that shape what can be written and how it's understood. It dismisses the author's biography, which can sometimes genuinely eliminate textual features. It may miss political dimensions of literature, how it is critic, or reinforce power structures, and it assumes universal aesthetic standards, not recognizing that. What counts as good literature varies across culture and historical periods. These limitations led to the development of other theoretical approaches that formalism neglected, but despite its limitations, formalism emphasis on close reading remains foundational to literary study. Even critics who consider historical context or reader responses must first attend carefully to what the text actually says and how it's constructed. Now, let's go to the legacy of formalism. Formalism gives us the vocabulary and habits of attention necessary for all subsequent theoretical approaches. Its legacy endures in our continued practice of supporting interpretations with specific textual evidence, analyzing literary devices, and appreciating how forms shape meaning. You cannot do sophisticated literary criticism without the close reading skill that formalism emphasizes. Before you can analyze a text's historical context, you need to know what the text actually says before you can apply physical or psychological theory. You need to identify the textual evidence that supports your interpretation. Formalism provides this foundation. It teaches you to read carefully, to notice details, to see how texts are constructed. Every theoretical approach we'll discuss builds on these formalist foundations. So while we will move beyond the formalism, exclusive focus on the text itself will never abandon its central insight. Literary texts are carefully crafted verbal structures and understanding how they're built in essential to understanding what they mean. Now, let's go for reader response theory introduction. Now let's turn to a dramatically different approach, reader response theory. This theory represents a dramatic shift from text-centered approaches like formalism. And instead of asking what does this text mean, reader response critics ask how do readers make meaning from this text. This approach recognizes that reading is not passive reception of fixed meanings, but an active creative process. Each reader brings unique experiences, cultural backgrounds, expectations, and emotional or emotions to the text, and these factors fundamentally shape interpretation. Far from being a weakness or desperation, this vulnerability is seen as the very essence of how literature works. Think about it. Have you ever discussed a book with someone and been surprised by their interpretation? Maybe they loved a character you hated, or they found a scene funny that made you sad. Reader response theory says these differences aren't problems to be solved. They are features of how literature functions. Texts do not have single fixed meaning waiting to be discovered. Instead, meaning emerges from the interaction between text and reader. Now let's move to factors influencing reading. There are three major factors shapes shape how readers create meaning. First, individual experience. Every reader's personal history, memories, and experiences color their understanding of characters, situations, and themes. A reader who has experienced loss will respond differently to a story about grief uh, than one who hasn't someone who who's been betrayed will read differently about trust and deception. These personal experiences aren't irrelevant. They are resources that readers draw on to make sense of texts. Second, cultural background, cultural frameworks profoundly influence interpretation. Readers from different cultures may notice different elements, identify with different characters, or drew different conclusions from the same narrative. What seemed like common sense to one cultural group might be puzzling or problematic to another. Cultural values about family individualism, authority, gender roles, countless uh, other issues shape how we read. Third, the recursive nature of reading. Reader response theory emphasizes that reading is not linear. You don't just move from beginning to end up absorbing information. Instead, we constantly loop back, revise interpretations, and build meaning cumulatively. You might think a character is heroic, then later realize they're deeply flawed, which makes you interpret earlier scenes. Each reading can yield new insights because you bring different knowledge and expectations the second or third time through. Uh, Key concepts in reader response theory. Several key concepts structure reader response criticism. The implied reader refers to hypothetical reader The text seems to assume the reader who would understand all the references, appreciate the jokes, and follow the narrative logic. This implied reader is different from actual readers who may align with or resist this position. For example, a Victorian novel might assume readers share certain moral values that contemporary readers do not hold. Interpretive communities are groups who share reading strategies and assumptions, leading to similar interpretation despite individual differences. In your English class formed an interpretive community. You learned similar analytical approaches and share certain assumptions about how to read. Professional literary critics form another interpretive community. These communities agree on basic protocols, even when they disagree on specific interpretations. The reading process focuses on the temporal experience of moving through a text with expectations of forming, being met, or being frustrated. How does a mystery novel create suspense by manipulating your expectations, making you anticipate certain outcomes? When those expectations are frustrated or fulfilled, you experience emotional responses that are part of the text's meaning. Affective stylistics examine how texts create emotional responses and how those emotions guide interpretation. If a passage makes you angry or sad or joyful, that emotional response isn't separate from understanding. It's a part of how you make meaning. Now let's go to the Stanley Fish quote. Listen to this influential statement from Stanley Fish, a major reader response first. He said, and I quote, "The reader's role is not to discover what the text means, but to create meaning through interaction with the text. Reading is a transaction between reader and text, not an extraction of pre-existing meaning." This is a radical claim. Fish is saying that meaning isn't sitting in the text waiting for you to find it. The treasure is in a chest. Instead, meaning emerges from what happens when you encounter the text. The text provides words, structures, patterns, but you activate those elements through your reading processes or process. This doesn't mean anything goes or that all interpretations are equally valid. The text still constrains interpretation. You cannot reasonably claim that the catcher and the ray is about space travel, but within those constraints, readers actively construct meaning rather than passively receiving it. This shifts our understanding of what reading is from discovery to creation, from passive reception to active engagement. Now, let's go to the reception theory, historical readers. An important branch of reader response criticism examines how different generations of readers have interpreted texts differently. A novel that seemed vocabulary revolutionary when published might later be conservative, or vice versa. Shakespeare's plays have been read as a romantic entertainments, political logies, of psychological dramas, and the post-colonial texts, depending on when and where they're read. This historical dimension shows that texts do not have fixed meanings independent of readers. Instead, meaning emerges from the ongoing conversations between texts and their successive audiences. Every generation rewrites a classic by reading them through contemporary concerns and values. This isn't a distillation, it's how literature remains alive in and relevant across time. Now let's go to readers' response about implications for teaching and writing. Reader response theory has important implications for teaching and writing about literature. It validates student interpretations while still maintaining standards for well-supported readings. It encourages us to be conscious of our assumptions and the biases, to consider how our identity shapes our reading, and to remain open to interpretations we might not have considered. This doesn't mean all interpretations are equally valid. Readings must still be supported by textual evidence and the logical reasoning, but it does mean we should expect and value interpretive diversity. A classroom discussion where everyone reaches exactly the same conclusion is probably missing something. Literature rich enough to study uh, should generate multiple valid interpretations that illuminate different aspects of the text. Now let's move to psychological criticism. Psychological criticism applies theories of human psychology, particularly psychoanalysis, to literary interpretation, drawing primarily from Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, uh, though also incorporating later psychological theories. This approach treats texts as windows into the human psyche. Psychological critics might analyze characters as if they were real people with unconscious minds, examine how texts reflect their authors' psychological states, or explore how narratives tap into universal psychological patterns. This approach assumes that literature expresses deep truths about human nature, desire, fear, and motivation that may not be fully conscious even to the author. When Freud analyzed literary works, he treated them like dreams as symbolic expressions of unconscious content that could be interpreted to reveal hidden meanings. This added a new dimension to literary criticism, connecting textual analysis to theories of the human mind. Now let's move to the major psychological frameworks. Several psychological frameworks inform this criticism. Freudian concepts include the structure of the psyche, ID, ego, and superego, the division between conscious and unconscious mind defense mechanisms like repression, pushing threatening thoughts of our out of consciousness, displacement, redirecting emotions toward safer targets, and sublimation, channeling unacceptable impulses into social acceptable activities. The Oedipus complex, or Oedipus complex, the child's conflicted feelings towards parents appears frequently in psychoanalytical readings, as does attention to the symbolism of dreams and the unconscious. Trauma theory, how literature represents and processes traumatic experience, repetition, and working through the unbreakable and unrepresentable. Jungian archetypes, collective, unconscious, and universal symbols and patterns, archetypes like the shadow, anima, animus, the wise old man, the hero's journey, individuation, object relations, early childhood relationships, shaping personality, attachment patterns, how characters relate to other, reflecting psychological development. Now let's go for example, psychoanalytical reading. In Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, a psychoanalytical critic might analyze Robert Jordan's relationship to his father's suicide as source of unconscious guilt and his need to prove masculinity through heroic action. The novel's preoccupation with death, the symbolism of the bridge connection and this traction, and Jordan's final act could be read as working through unresolved psychological conflicts about paternal legacy and self-worth. The bridge he must destroy connects two sides, perhaps symbolizing Jordan's own internal split, his conflicted feelings about masculinity, violence, and his father's memory. When Jordan finally faces death and the novel's end, he does so bravely, lying wounded and waiting for enemies' soldiers. Psychological reading might see this as resolving the paternal conflict, providing he's not a coward, achieving the masculine ideal he needed to embody, and perhaps unconsciously joining his father in death, but on his own terms. Now let's move to character analysis. Psychological criticism often focus on characters' motivation, particularly unconscious drives that may contradict their stated intentions. Why does Hamlet delay what drives Lady Macbeth's ambition? By applying psychological theory, we can uh, propose explanation for behaviors that seem irrational or contradictory on the surface, revealing deeper coherence in character psychology. Characters become more than plot functions, they become psychoanalytically or psychologically complex subjects whose behaviors, however strange, follow psychological logic once we understand their unconscious motivations. Now let's move to symbolic interpretation. Following Freud's interpretation of dreams, psychological critics read the literary symbols as expressing unconscious content. Houses might represent the self. Journeys might symbolize psychological development. The recurring images might reveal obsessive concerns. The symbolic reading uncovers latent content beneath manifest narrative. The story you think you're reading, manifest content, is actually about deeper psychological concerns, latent content. Charlotte Perkins um, Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper is manifestly about the woman's wrist cure, but latently about women's oppression, madness, and the desire for creative and personal freedom that might be repressed. Now let's move to the value and the quotients. I can say that psychological criticism reveals deeper layers of meaning related to universal human experiences, desire, fear, loss, identity, formation, and the struggle between conscious control and unconscious forces. It shows how literature can serve therapeutic functions, allowing both authors and readers to explore threatening or forbidden materials and symbolically displays the form. At its best, psychological criticism helps us understand not just the literary characters but ourselves, recognize in fictional representation expectations, the same psychological patterns that shape our own lives. However, critics must be careful not to reduce complex literary works to a simple case study or to colonize authors based solely on their texts used judicially. Psychological criticism adds a rich dimension to literary interpretation, connecting textual analysis to broader questions about human nature and experience. Now, let's go to new historicism and the cultural criticism introduction. We will stop here and we will continue next session talking about new historicism and the cultural criticism introduction. Until next time, tata for now.